Serious, socially fluent people of Reddit. What are some mistakes you see socially awkward people making? Not noticing when they are telling an irrelevant story to a service worker or stranger. The number of waitresses that I see dancing on the spot while waiting for a customer to stop talking is astounding. Edit. Grammar. Or anyone. The never-ending boring story is painful at parties too. I have an otherwise good employee who I have to have a regular conversation with about this. He has a never-ending boring story about just about everything too. I don't consider myself amazingly socially fluent. But I work with a lot of engineers who make me feel like I am in comparison. The biggest mistake that I see them making is talking about themselves, or their work, non-stop without acknowledging that there's another person in the conversation. It's like, full stop. Dude. You're in a conversation. Pause sometimes. Gauge the other person's interest. Ask a question of them occasionally. Edit. I feel like I should have noted that I'm also an engineer, well, more of a scientist in terms of my job now. So I have nothing against engineers. It's just something that I've noticed frequently among my colleagues. Also look for signs that the other person is done with the conversation. And wrap it up. If you've been speaking non-stop for half an hour about something and the other person is fidgeting and starting to avoid eye contact and has tried several times to interrupt you with, well, I've got to get. For God's sake, let them leave. Speaking non-stop for half an hour. At that point, just call it a seminar and keep going. I've met a lot of people who speak in very self-deprecating ways to an uncomfortable extent. I understand not wanting to appear vain and opting to humble oneself. Demonstrating self-awareness. However, some people will take this a bit too far. When speaking about yourself, do so with confident modesty. Don't reduce yourself to only your flaws. I love self-deprecating humor. But the key is to make it humorous. I am generally pretty good at it and I use it as a way to connect with people so they're not on edge around me. Normally I am a quiet person and serious looking person. So I think it helps most people relax if they know I do not take myself seriously at all. If I notice someone constantly negging themselves, being self-deprecating, I will bring it to their attention. Damn dude. You're being pretty hard on yourself. Sometimes people don't realize that they're doing it. But I've casually observed most are consciously fishing for sympathy or attention. Looked at for a map. This is so true and a harsh truth I have had to learn over the years. In my opinion, I come up with some pretty hilarious banter but I have a fairly quiet, soft voice. I have just had to accept that I only get one shot at a joke. And if it barely gets heard, so be it. I looked at for a map. I heard a quote once that helps me whenever I talk to strangers. Confidence is when you walk into a room and assume everyone already likes you. Obviously, this isn't true for every case. But in my experience, if you start off every interaction by imagining that good feelings exist, good feelings will actually exist. Everyone just wants to be liked. So if you pretend they already like you, you'll like them. And then they'll be happy that you already like them. It's a warm, fuzzy cycle. A mistake I see that socially awkward people make is assuming that everyone doesn't like them. And then the cycle becomes awkward, rather than warm and inviting. Edit. Holy crap, this blew up overnight. Thank you for the golds. Kind strangers. The worst part of this is when you realize that someone likes you. And for whatever reason you're just screwing up socially that day. And you can see the light leaving their eyes as they decide, conclusively, that they don't really want to talk to you anymore. I had a date not too long ago where I was just tired and boring. And I spent the whole thing just upset at what I was putting this poor girl through. Yeah. I know. I wish this could be over too. A little late. But when it comes to dates, you could probably save it by telling your date that you're having a bad day and ask for a reschedule. Don't tell the other person that you think you're socially awkward. I have a friend that does this. She'll just drop it right in there. Conversation ongoing. Lull in conversation. Suddenly, "Sorry, I'm not entertaining enough," in sad voice. Or, "Sorry, I feel like I'm dragging everyone down." Or, "Sometimes I get socially awkward." 99% of the time, if you're not talking or not entertaining enough, people will just assume you are shy, quiet, or simply don't have anything to say at the moment. When you open your mouth, it's like you're saying, "I feel awkward, sad, and everyone else should too." Taking their mistakes too seriously. Being an anxious person myself, I get that ducking up and saying you too to the waiter or the ticket person is embarrassing. But you're literally one face of thousands they have to deal with every day. What I usually do after ducking up like that to avoid that dark, memory-filled shame hole in my brain is to just explain my duck up in an amused tone, laugh at myself, and move on. I bet you any money they'll remember you more for your flustered behavior afterwards rather than the initial duck up. This is true. And I just found out for myself that no one will give a duck about something small except you. My friend has a small rock waterfall, man-made, outside his house. A couple years ago I was walking down the waterfall and fell down. Not into the water, but down the side. Pretty embarrassing, but also pretty funny. Then at least 10 minutes later I fell down again. And both these times it wasn't like I fell on my ass. I tumbled head first cause I missed my step, and it's honestly amazing I didn't fall into the water both times. After the second time I felt stupid. I thought no one would forget it. I have a hard time walking downstairs without looking at the ground now. This was over 5 years ago. Anyway, fast forward till this past weekend. When I was at my friend's place again, I brought it up. And both of my friends who were there that day have no recollection I fell down the waterfall twice in 15 minutes. We were all also very sober at the time too. So basically, don't trip over the small stuff. No one gives a duck except you. I suspect it's because they're too busy thinking over their own slip-ups. Here's an exercise. Think of the last time you said or did something really stupid or embarrassing. You can probably think of something in about 5 seconds. Right? Now think of the last time someone else did something truly stupid or embarrassing. Probably takes a bit longer to come up with something. Right? Maybe you can't think of anything at all. That's what's going on in almost everyone's head. I used to be quite socially awkward. I'm still an introvert, but I've learned to turn it on off very easily. I've found the one basic thing very awkward people tend to do that totally screws them is trying to prepare for a situation or contemplate what they will do. Go through scenarios in their heads. What happens is that once they get into the actual situation, they spend a ridiculous amount of time matching everything that happens to what they wanted to happen. Then you get that weird and very awkward lag time effect where you will ask a person a question and they stall and break and use filler words. Best thing to do is to not really factor in people being part of something socially speaking. If you notice, very socially fluent people will pretty much take other people at face value as opposed to trying to investigate them in their heads. Example. You want to invite your friends to the movies. Socially awkward. Thinks about every single one of his friends' potential motives. Changes mind on 2 of them. Ends up not asking. Orders ask but in a really weak tone because he's already thought up like 6 scenarios in which they don't go. Socially adept. Hey, you guys want to go to the movies? Doesn't mine any further than thinking that people might want to go to the movies. Not being able to pick up when someone else is completely disinterested in what you are talking about. Funny thing is, a lot of the socially awkward people I know are so caught up in what the other person thinks about them that they don't give any mind to what the other person is thinking. Do they look interested? Have you reciprocated interest in stuff they want to talk about? Yeah, this is a different kind of social awkward. The person talking isn't shy necessarily, but they aren't interested in what the other person thinks, which is off-putting and socially awkward in itself. Yet they likely don't even recognize that. One of the most important things is to understand who you're talking to and make the conversation match the relationship. How you talk to a stranger, service worker, close friend, and family are all different, Context is everything, and what's perfectly acceptable or even amicable to say to one person is not acceptable to say to another. I've met people who are friends of friends, work acquaintances, or strangers who think they can get away with doing something only a close friend or relative could do, such as a ball-busting joke or overly honest opinion, and come off as a total ass and usually turn the entire group off. Just because I've called my best friend of 9 years a silly, drunken ape at a bar, doesn't necessarily mean you can do the same if you just met him. These things require a certain amount of social currency. If you haven't built up a wealth of it, you can't afford it. Or even just being a buzzkill. I have learned that when with a new group of people, who I'll probably never meet again, it's not always necessary be a downer, even if it's the truth. For example, when they hear I have twin stepchildren, a boy and a girl, maybe they'll reference how girls and boys dating driving other milestones are different. Now, if I'm honest, I'd say, well, my stepson is developmentally disabled, has autism, and he'll probably never do those things and he's going to need lifelong supervision. But if I want to have a nice night and not bring everyone down, I'll just say, yeah, you're right. My husband is crazy protective of my daughter, lol. Sometimes it's not worth the pity on their faces and the resulting depression I feel for the rest of the night. Know your audience. I was a totally socially dysfunctional person in high school when I was 13 or 14. I often went weeks without speaking to anyone outside of my family. I'm now reasonably well liked with a very big social circle post college. I was my college class president and am now really involved in my community in a bunch of big ways. Things I learned. People want to like you. I used to think that when I met someone I had to do or say something likable to start off a friendship. The anxiety and pressure of trying to figure out how to get someone to like me would make me say nothing at all. It turns out that, for the most part, someone who doesn't know you assumes that you're a chill person already. So making conversation became more about making the other person comfortable, rather than oh god don't say anything dumb or they're going to hate you. People love talking about themselves. And most people have some form of life experience that is genuinely interesting. You can lean on that, ask them questions and let them talk. It's flattering and it'll actually take strain off of you too. If you're socially awkward, you're probably more focused on yourself than the other person. I recently dated someone who I really liked, but was more awkward than me. I noticed that I spent the entire time asking them questions about themselves, and they'd never reciprocate, since they were anxious and just focused on answering. In a weird way, social awkwardness becomes unintentionally selfish. You're worried about the other person's opinion of you, so you spend the entire time thinking about yourself, keeping an eye out on your own energy levels. I'm social now or whatever, but I'm like an iPhone 5 with a shitty battery. I can be friendly and happy and funny for a few hours and then I need to be alone before the jig is up and everyone realizes I'm an awkward mess. If I feel tired or uncomfortable after a while at a party, then I'll leave with a polite excuse. No sense in pushing it. At worst, you're seen as that person that is super busy all the time but still took the time to stop by and say hi. Minor things. Good posture and dressing well go a long way. My father told me when I was young that if I don't know what to say to someone, then ask them about themselves because people love talking about themselves. I've used this method for decades and I can easily make friends anywhere, waiting in line, in a coffee shop, wherever. I can very easily get people to open up, laugh, and enjoy my company. However, the downside to this has been that it's turned into a one-sided thing. Most, if not all of my family and friends, rarely ask me anything about myself. They appear to see me as the person they can easily talk to, but don't seem to realize it's just about themselves. I have in-laws who I can chat with, or be a sounding board to, for hours. But when I relate something they've said to myself, they'll respond with, I didn't know you used to be a professional musician, etc. Because they've literally never asked me about my life, even after 12 years. And if I've worked in some information about myself to them, they don't remember it in the least. People rarely ask me anything about myself outside of how are you. I mentioned it to my husband and he's noticed it too. So much so that he now tries to steer a conversation so that I can get a chance to share information about myself, rather than be the one asking all the questions. Either way, it still works in terms of appearing to be social. But after years, I don't really enjoy it all that much because it feels like no one cares to ask me anything about my life. I recently dated someone who I really liked, but was significantly more socially awkward than me. I noticed that I spent the entire time asking them questions about themselves, and they'd never reciprocate. This is my biggest pet peeve in dating. I am a good listener and genuinely interested in people, so I ask questions and like to hear the answers. Less than 50% of people ask me any questions back. I don't say anything about it, but it's a good test for me on whether I want to spend more time with that person. Best comment of the day. How I stopped caring what people think is by thinking about myself as just myself and everyone else like everyone else. People aren't thinking about you getting worked up about what they think about you. The only person that does that is yourself. If you think someone is judging you, they're only doing it to make themselves look better because they are insecure about others judging them.